Hey guys, so Brother Birch asked me to go over my Prove 03 for this week, just to give you guys a general idea of how it works and how you can apply it to your own projects. So I'm going to go through my version of this week's Prove, and hopefully it'll give you guys a better help of how you can apply it to your own projects. So this week we're going to be reading in from a JSON file, and then we're going to be parsing out that information and then displaying it according to what the user wants to see. So in honor of May 4th, I went ahead and made a Star Wars application, and my home page, I am collecting all the information from all the characters, or at least 12 of the characters in Star Wars. This is inside of my JSON file. I have 12 different objects. Each one is a different character, and I have an image URL. I have a name for each one, and my home page is collecting all that information and displaying these two things to the user. Now, as you can see, this is once again the Prove 3 directory. If I click on here, it's going to append something to the URL. It's going to append an ID of the character that I'm looking at. If I go back and I select another character, let's say R2D2, you're going to see that the number is different. And that's because I'm sending the unique ID of that object to the URL to then know which character I'm wanting to display to the user. So now I'm going to go into my code and I'm going to show you a little bit of how my routing is working and how I'm working with the logic of what I want to show to the users. So let's go to my code. We will start out at my routes. As you can see, my routes is very simple. At this point, I only have two routes. I have the Prove 03 general route, which shows all the characters. Then I have one with an ID. Now, in the readings, it talks a little bit about model view controller. So controller deals with the logic, and model generally deals with receiving the information from the file or from the database. So right here in my router, I'm going to be dealing with the controller. Up here we see that we create a variable for the controller, and we're reading in from the controller file that's in my controller's directory. Now I'm setting this variable equal to that location, which then allows me to call a function inside of that file directory. So upon calling the home directory, we're going to call the read.json file. So let's go to my controller. Come into my controller and we see my read.json file. Now, I'm not asking anything from the user. I'm not receiving anything from the user. I'm just wanting to display the contents that I want to from the JSON file. So I'm not asking for any requests, but I am going to give them a response. Once again, just like we did in our routes, where we created a controller variable, I'm going to do the same thing in my controller file, but this time accessing the model. Once again, this is just the route to the model file that I'm going to be using. So now I'm going to go into that model and I'm going to call this function, and I'm going to send it a callback function with two different responses. We have error and we have result. If there's an error sent back, then we will redirect to the home page. I don't do any error handling in this, but it's a good idea to do that to either show a 404 page or redirect them to a page that you want them to go to rather than receiving an error. So that's if we get an error. But if the callback function returns with a result, we can then set our array. It might be items, mine is characters. We're going to set that to the result that we get back. And then I'm going to render my EJS file with what I got back. And we're seeing right here, I'm setting characters to characters, which refers to the array that I got back. Let's go into my model. Here's where I'm going to be reading in from the file. We see here, this is the read characters from file. Actually, no, we're going to be doing read JSON from file. That is what I was calling here, read JSON from file. Come back into here, read JSON from file is now my function. I have a callback. Like I said, I'm not doing any error handling. And there are many ways to read in from a JSON file. I chose the require method. You could use the file system, the FS, if you're more comfortable with that. I chose to use this. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting my variable of characters equal to the contents of this JSON file. I console log it just to make sure that I have the information that I want. And then I'm doing a callback where I'm saying there was no error, and I'm sending back the characters. So we go back to that controller. Once again, the result is going to then be that array that we just got. I'm going to set it equal to characters. And then I'm going to send that characters to my EJS file. If we come up here to my Pruvo3 EJS file, we now have our characters array that we have sent to our EJS file. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to loop through the length of that characters, and we are going to show a few different things as we talked about previously when we were showing the file. First, I show the URL, so I do characters I image URL, which is coming from the JSON file, characters I name. Actually, that's an alternate for the photo, but it's the same concept down here where I'm displaying the name of that specific character. Now I'm doing something up here, which is very important if you're going to be using the URL to send your information. I have a reference or a link to my root directory for Pruvo3 along with a specific ID that I'm going to be using. Along with a specific ID that I'm going to be using for that character. Now if we go back to my routes, we can see that we have the root directory along with an ID, and I'm not specifying what the ID is going to be here because that's up to the user when they select. The ID will be specific to the character that is being displayed in the for loop. So let's go back to my controller, or actually to my routes real quick. So we see this, if the user selects it, they're going to be selecting the root directory, the Pruvo3, with an ID defined from the link that they selected. This will then go into the controller, and the controller is going to execute the function read character. Let's go to my controller, read character. We now are getting a request because there is an ID in the URL, and we need that ID to be able to get the character that we want. So right here, I'm setting my ID equal to the request params ID. Params is going to be taken from the URL. We have a few different options that we can use here. If we're using post, we're going to use body. If we're using get, then we are going to use, look that up, query. We're going to use query. And then if we're using the URL, we're going to use params. All right, so now we're going to be taking that ID, and we're going to be going into the model to then collect the information we want from that JSON file. We're going to be using the read character from file function, and we're going to send it two things. We're going to send it an ID, and we're going to send it a callback. Once again, the callback checks for an error. If we don't get an error, then once again we are going to display our EJS file. So let's go into our model real quick. Once again, we are doing the same kind of thing we did last time, but this time we now have an ID that we were wanting to look at. So we have our ID and our callback, and what I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, where I read all the information from the JSON file into this, and then I loop through all the characters, and I'm looking at each character's ID. Now I'm casting here, I'm casting my ID to an integer, so I can compare them. If the ID that was given in the URL is equal to the character's ID, then I'm going to create a new variable called character, which will be equal to that character that was found in the JSON array. Once again, I'm going to console log just to make sure that I got the information that I want. And then we're going to do callback null because there was no error, and we're sending back a character that we want to look at. Now if we come back to the controller, once again, we're setting characters equal to the result that we got back, and then we are displaying that to the user. Now, if we go to our My Display EJS, this is where I am showing their image, I'm showing their name, I'm showing their gender, their birth year, their height, and it's important to remember that this is all coming from our JSON file. If I look in here, I have Luke Skywalker. Here's the ID that we're checking, but we also have stuff like name, image URL, height, mass. These are all things that I can then access because I have the information of that character. So yeah, that's the general overview of this project. I hope it makes sense to you guys, and I hope it helps you with your personal projects and how you can do it. You can use the URL to get item specific information. You can also use post, you can use get, which will be different. If you guys have any questions, feel free to contact either Andrew or myself, and we'll be glad to help you guys. We understand this is a lot to start out with, but I hope that my little guide going through all of this is able to help you to get a nice start on the project and an understanding of what you're trying to do. Thanks, guys.